Good evening. We've chosen a topic to discuss today, stop losses, which all of us know about, but only very few can take them. What is the reason for that and how to rectify it? So, before we discuss why only few people can take it and how to rectify it, let's spend a significant time or depth into figuring out what is a stop loss and why it is required. Even though we know about it, perhaps many of us do not know the real reason for them or the real utility for them. So let's first discuss and figure out what's the utility of a stop loss. And even before we figure out the utility of a stop loss, let's discuss from the very basics. Any kind of an exposure in the market, whether a long term purchase or a long term removal from the portfolio, or a short term trading bet of a long or a short, or you do a hedge or you do an arbitraged position, let's call all of them as any market exposure. So, when should one take any market exposure of any kind? Whenever one is taking any market exposure, one is making a decision. And whenever one is pruning down that market exposure or eventually removing that market exposure, that is also a time when you are taking a decision. So, on one hand, it is human nature. Some people are able to take a lot of decisions, and some people find it very burdensome to take a lot of decisions. So, keeping nature apart, say we will assume a balanced person who takes decisions in a rational way. So, keep aside the markets for a moment. Keep aside the markets for a moment. If we just ask a general question about decisions anywhere in life, when should one take a decision? So, common sense would suggest, like in a game of cards or in any negotiation, one must speak up or show up the hand only when it is necessary. So, a decision should be made only when necessary. Why? Every decision you take no decision that you will ever make will come free, because nothing in life comes for free. There is a cost related to every decision. So, what is that cost? And what is the benefit of taking a decision? If the expected benefit of taking a decision is greater than the expected cost of a decision, then one must take that decision, right? Because life is a series of decisions. And even if your expectations are computed wrongly or your estimations work out to be incorrect, then also through a series of decisions, if you are an astute decision maker, you will take decisions whose expected benefit is greater than the expected cost. But like in several spaces in the past, I must have clarified this. The valor in discretion is about what not to do. It is too easy to be triggered, prompted, cued, provoked by so many sensorial inputs that come to us, that the sign of a mature person is that a mature person shall do those things that must be done. The mature person will not speak whatever that can be spoken, but a mature person will speak what must be spoken. So, if the good values of life are about focusing on what not to do, much more than a vast and longer list of what can be done, then a decision is not to be taken only when its expected cost is going to be less than the expected benefit, but much rather A decision must be taken. A decision, rather, a decision can be taken when the expected cost of taking the decision is likely to be less than the expected cost of staying within indecision. I'll repeat this. A decision need not be taken just when it appears to us that the expected benefit of taking a decision is greater than the expected cost of the decision, but a better filter which will make us more serious decision makers is that a decision may be taken when the expected cost of decision is likely to be less than the expected cost of indecision. Because any of us can remain in either of two states. If we are conscious of something, if we are not ignorant of something, if it is there within our consciousness, then either we can be decisive about things or we can wait to decide about them, and that second state is indecisiveness. So in such a mental, simpler framework, to decide or not to decide, to be here or not to be here, is simply that if the cost of indecision is likely to be less than taking a decision, we should not take a decision, we should keep waiting and watching the market. This principle can be applied to anything in life, and I think good decision makers indeed are following this framework in mind, with or without realizing this framework in so many verbose terms. But particularly in markets, having this kind of clarity about your decision-making process is critical. Why? Since we've discussed endless number of times that it is the presence of risk that which creates returns. Okay? A riskless situation can at most provide you the risk-free rate of return, and that too also will have transaction costs and taxes. So transaction cost and taxes would in any case be there in good or bad all decision making. But otherwise, for active investing or active trading where you're not passively put your money in a fixed deposit or in a long-term government bond, and you've come to either chasing alpha, which is superior returns over the risk-free rate, or by active market timing, you are trying to generate returns out of your apparent skills, then it becomes critical to have this framework of mind that you can either be inside a decision or you may remain inside an indecision. So the expected cost of a decision and an expected cost of indecision open up our mind to a much greater appreciation that with or without the exposure, there is always risk. Why? If you are an active investor or if you are a regular investor, active word is a stronger word, or you are a trader, you are an absolutely active trader, then if you haven't got into a position now and you get prompted into, sucked into, pulled into the same position much later, there is an opportunity cost in building a position now versus later. So opportunity cost is the cost of indecision. So if you have not taken a trade, you have to have the skills, abilities, or inputs by which you can estimate what is the potential cost of taking the same position later if I don't take it now. And the cost of a decision or cost of a position, that what if I've taken a position, then how do I calculate the cost? So let me explain these two simply. And then, we will figure out that stop loss is also a decision. And because it is a decision, it creates the same hesitation. Should I decide? Should I not decide? With an additional complexity that this time you are deciding against yourself. So I'm giving you a peep into the next slide of my thoughts. But for a moment, say you are in general feeling there's a strong uptrend, and within which a small correction has come or a large correction has come. And now you're trying to anticipate that what if I do not buy now and tomorrow morning this explodes up with a gap up? So the expected gap up, expected means you'll have to do some rough estimation, is your cost of indecision till tomorrow morning versus, buying into the close now. Or if something will really open up with a gap up and then you have to buy at that gap up is an easier cost estimation. But say something like this. If I'm going off on a holiday for 7 days and it's a strong market, how much the stock can move in 7 days versus buying now? And I buy now and leave a stop loss with my broker. So for varieties of different people and varieties of different situations, the descriptive way of describing situations will become hundreds of situations of cost of indecision. So I'll now jump into a bit of jargonized description that can take care of all the situations with one definitional attempt. Since no returns are possible without taking some risk, and we've discussed it endless number of times with a hypothetical model, that if any man was ever born or will ever be born who can make money without taking any risks in the market, he knows the future completely, he will be able to borrow at the risk-free rate because his business enterprise is known to be risk-free, but he will be investing in a business of risk. So he'll earn a large premium for his skill. And therefore, he will be, by repeating this cycle, keeping on borrowing infinitely larger sums of money at risk-free rate and investing it into a risky business, which he somehow is able to do without any risk. So he will destroy the entire financial fabric of the universe because there is nobody else who has this edge. So he will take all the money away, or nobody will be willing to fill the other side of his trade. So in either case, the market will come to standstill. So such a process of reasoning or building a model or creating a logic can be termed as reductio ad absurdum. So the whole idea that anyone can make money without taking any risk is an idea that can be, through simple common sense, be reduced to absurdity. If the market closes down forever, or if nobody else is left with any money to make money against this guy, so in any case, then let's not wait for finding such a skill. Therefore, if only there is some uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future, and by superior skills or by superior luck, some people will make money and some will lose money. The other simpler way to look at it is this: is if everybody had the same skill of knowing exactly what will happen on even one thing, then if something good happened, there will be nobody willing to sell into such a market and prices will only jump up at zero volume. Everybody's bidding and nobody's asking. And if something bad happened, everybody is willing to sell it, but there is nobody willing to buy it. So that also will reduce the market to an absurdity. So thank God, he is not yet done with his piece of responsibility, that is making this world a better place. Is not yet done. So this world is not a perfect place, and we must thank God for it. Because if this world were a perfect place, none of us will have any choices. We will be mere conscious observers, which is what one strain of Hindu spirituality, Vedanta, aspires for, that all of us are instruments of the Lord. And if we will let him prevail, to just learn from the experiences he's giving us in this life. But that becomes like esoteric. For mundane routine affairs of the universe, of mankind, because there is uncertainty and because God is not yet done with his work, there are opportunities for us to indulge with the future. Therefore, since there will be always some risk, There is a risk in taking a decision and there is a risk in not taking a decision. When the risk of taking a decision appears to be lower than the risk of not taking a decision, we should take the decision. Or opening a position as well as taking a stop or quantitative models or from tech existing positions that we have. Now the mathematics is applied exactly opposite. If I do not take a decision to unwind this exposure, and if that decision of not winding up the exposure is going to be cheaper than the decision to wind up the position, then I should just hold on to that position. Since spaces do not allow two-way interactivity, I'm not sure if we can tweet out any remarks or questions, and whoever is speaking at that point can keep an eye on his timeline and we can try to create a discussion. So I'm using simple terms, but since so many verbs are getting repeated in a single sentence, they may kind of create a confusion. So I was wondering. Now let's come to the point that since there is no decision you can take without any risk, and there are no profits possible without any risk, howsoever clever your forecasting system is or your money management system is, money management is not necessarily equal to stop loss. Howsoever clever your system is, after you've taken a position, there are chances that you may have estimated things incorrectly. Cost of taking a decision versus indecision. And you might still be continuing to make the error the other way around now, that you are continuing to underestimate the cost of indecision by which you are keeping on holding the position versus the cost of decision. Say somebody bought at 100 and the price has become 90. For an example, 10% stop loss would be very high for most people unless and until they are real long-term investors. So, a person may continue to make that error. Yeah, I'm going to lose 10% money. If I close this position, this money is gone. So this is one mental heuristic where, we account for profits or losses only after they are booked. Every day the MTM is, with every tick the MTM is hitting you, but mentally does not register. So those psychological aberrations, I'll come in the second part, which will be a much smaller part of why people, despite understanding the virtue of stop loss, cannot take it and how to overcome those psychological shortcomings. It's a much smaller part. So a person can continue to remain in that state of denial. I've been advised by an expert. I have some real dope, some real punter I know who controls the stock, and he is not selling. That bugger may be holding his positions at 20 different brokers, and you are able to observe his position at only one broker. He may be creating some very deceptive large positions at 5 brokers, trading very actively at other 5 brokers. At other 5 brokers, he may be trading opposite to his actual view to create liquidity in and out of his position. And at other 5 brokers, he may be just, doing trading on another time horizon versus the time horizon on which he has taken this position. So there are endless number of ways in which our mind can easily deceive itself. And the 3 common problems with the human mind is like akin to an operating system. The human mind loves to enjoy, it loves to control, and it loves to prove its superiority. So those who are more educated, those who are more well-read, those whom the world admires more, that how smart they are, that feeling of that good feeling that, I'm intelligent, everybody says I'm intelligent, my intelligence is so handy in so many situations, all that happiness that comes to you because you are aware of intellect is also not coming for free, because nothing in this world will come for free. Against some debit there will be a credit, because this whole world is a zero. This whole world at the end is a zero. At the beginning for us, it was a zero. When we will go from here, it will be a zero. In between the two zeros, there are so many things that have happened. And unless and until the sum total of everything that is happening to you is a zero, the beginning and end cannot be a zero. If that is an attitude, we can debate someday. I think that attitude really helps in overcoming a lot of psychological weaknesses, particularly in trading and investing. So nothing will come for free. If the only gap is we may not know the cost. Like social media was free and everybody jumped into it, and then those popular jokes came that a kid said, well, he's my dad, he's going to be very upset. And Mark Zuckerberg told this kid in the school he went to give a lecture in, don't worry, he's not your dad, because Mark Zuckerberg knows who exactly his mom is chatting about, who she is dating and who she has been dating for last 20 years. So that popular joke aside, nothing comes for free. So the intellect that we enjoy, the positive affirmations we get from our spouses, kids, friends, relatives, the broader society, our professional colleagues, oh, how damn smart you are, that elevates our ego. The sense of identity, that I am so smart, that sense of identity stands challenged the moment a bad trade is screaming on your face, idiot, you aren't really that smart. But all of these transactions that I'm breaking down now, they are actually the net sum of all of them is working intuitively inside you. All of it is happening so fast that you don't see so many different transactions combining together to produce the final effect, which is creating a fear of losing this comfort that, oh God, I am so smart. When faced with a larger than tolerable loss, we may not even realize the 10,000 different things that happen in a split second inside our brain to challenge our very identity. My son is going to think I'm a jerk, I lose so much money. My wife will think I'm an irresponsible idiot who just doesn't care except for my gambling instincts. Or that, suppose if somebody is a total loner as well. Oh God, how could I be so dumb? So this whole challenge that happens to your identity in the event of adversity either will create fear or it will create frigidity. The fear that starts lurking in you, oh God, what will happen? So instead of taking a stop loss, one will call an expert, one will peep into social media, one will go to Google and search on that stock or term and look for any news. One will flip around TV channels, then one will ask another fellow trader, I'm badly stuck, what do I do? Goddamn idiot, first mistake you made was you got stuck. Now you want to make more mistakes to anyhow avoid addressing that mistake. So this is a cycle everybody has gone through endless number of times. And the reason people are unable to take stop losses, even if they chose to have a stop loss. No, don't worry. I've been a good trader. This year I made so much money. In that year I really minted money and I'm going to, again beginning trading after, my backpacking. But this time around, what is happening is the moment he started trading and one large bad trade came. So if there is no predefined tolerable loss, if you do not have a computation in your head even before you fire your first trade, how much you are entitled to lose. Now, this will sound very funny because any entitlements are in any case a defeatist idea. Any entitlements are a very, very communist idea. And trading and investing are very, very capitalistic. So you would be laughing at me. Why should I compute any entitlement to lose? It's a goddamn communist idea. Entitlements are so communist. So fine, even if they are a communist idea, and they are really, anti-religion for the religion of capitalism. Even that bad thing, a sense of entitlement, even if you have at least that computation, or you rather compute how much you are not supposed to lose. But the problem with this word not is the human mind refuses to understand the word not. For tens of thousands of years, we've been conditioned in battling against floods, earthquakes, vagaries of nature. We have prevailed. We have struggled all through our evolution to overcome the vagaries of nature. So, negative commands actually will reinforce further and you'll feel like battling them out. So, I have a positive command. How much am I allowed to lose? That entitlement to lose is a number which is very different for each person at all different stages of life. Your monthly expenses, your necessary compulsory savings that you must make for whatever assets you want to build for your personal life, your obligations towards your family, your tax obligations. You make a lot of money in capital gains, but you lose so much money in short-term trading that you don't have any money to be paying your capital gains tax also, will put you into shit. You'll have to declare bankruptcy and you'll be unfit for business ever again. So my simple definition of how much am I entitled to lose is the money that is left beyond what I have defined as my current financial duties. Current financial duties for buying all the things I consume, the things that my family needs, the taxes I need to pay, my corporate social responsibilities or charity needs, my compulsory savings needs. So that much money every month must be available for your well set goals and targets. And money that is not yet defined for any certain deployments, that also you will eventually learn to calculate over time, because everybody has a certain amount of earning capacity broadly. Even if one is a wacky trader who will have some few very good months, so one will intuitively know that these are abnormal months, but my usual run rate is either tied to certain rentals I'm earning, or certain interest incomes I'm earning, or a salaried income I'm earning, or I've invested into certain number of stores or whatever. So everybody has an estimated cash flow from businesses that can be planned for. For trading, you cannot have a budget for profits, because that will make you again emotionally attached that I must make so much money from trading. No good trading desks have any trading budgets, and any large investment banks that created a trading budget very soon went belly under. Almost all of them. No great investment banks create a budget from trading profits. Whoever does that, risk profligate behavior arises there. So from all other businesses and incomes or inheritances or your safe savings, after your compulsory consumption goals and compulsory savings goals, what is left, you distribute it over, say, period of time, maybe a year, a quarter, based on different circumstances. That's the max you can lose over that period of foreseeable time. And then if you are smart, you will not put it out as your stop loss dollar value on one single trade. Maybe you will break it down to at least 10 trades, maybe 20 trades. So that gives you a well judged entitlement to lose per trade. Entitlements are a communist idea, but even utilizing a negative idea from the negativity of communism, the two negatives can cancel out together and be a valuable friend for a capitalist. So you never allow yourselves to lose more than what you are entitled to lose on a single trade. And if you fix that constant dollar amount as the stop loss for each trade you do, then you will stop martingaling between your various trades. I'll try to keep the jargon out. The whole idea that outcome of one trade should not create a memory effect for you for the next trade. So that will necessitate that, like any other regular businessman, somebody who's running a store, he's selling, his bill for the next customer on the cash counter is $100. For the next one, it's $52. For the next one, it's $30. For the next one, it's $10. The average ticket size over, say, 500 invoices in a day in a general store would be, say, about, for example, $25. So that storekeeper is making money over a good number of transactions. So those who are doing high frequency trading, systematic trading, because of the automation that is there, they are able to afford to do a large number of small transactions. But when discretionary trading happens, this mind, our mind, our intellect and our ego are closely entwined together to create our mind. Our value system is generated out of who we think we are, and it's easily possible to overinflate it. And that overinflated sense of identity, how could I do this? Oh God, I'm really guilty. I'm sorry. Even though people say sorry and they appear to be humble, a lot of the times, perhaps majority of the times, the very quick utterance of sorry is less for the world, but more for, oh, I'm such an elevated soul. Oh, I'm such a high flyer in society. Oh, I'm supposed to be such a good guy. How could I do this? So it is the I that is dented. And the sense of apologies towards that I most of the time. Because the same people who say sorry so many times, so quickly and so easily, also easily flare up into anger. So anybody who keeps on saying a lot of sorry and still has a lot of anger has a lot of ego inside him. So how do we cut this ego out? That's a very long topic. I think, for anybody who's spiritually active and is this active spiritual seeker, the entire purpose is to dilute away the ego to zero, which perhaps will never happen, because nature also gave us this ego for some purpose. That without some sense of identity, we will not self preserve, we will not self express, and we will not self replicate. Nature has built whatever it has built into us for the propagation of our race forward, for those who are part of the current race, for the best out of them to be able to propitiate the race forward. The best of the best of the DNA amongst mankind today must create the generations of the future. The inferior men will have their sperms wasted. That's how the design of the nature is. So the sense of ego is a necessity for self-conservation, protecting oneself. A fearless man will just walk out of the window and be killed. So that fear comes from some amount of ego. So ego cannot be undone, but the ego can flare up too soon. And if we become aware of this idea that our ego can flare up too soon, we need to keep some rules. And we need to just stick to those rules anyhow. That no single trade will be allowed to lose more than $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 or $100. And once we fixate that number, that each trade for me is just one independent wager, then the game that is left is only to estimate the volatility on any particular financial security you are wanting to take an exposure to. So say your max tolerable loss is your max tolerable loss on any trade, or your constant tolerable loss. Let's keep it constant. Your constant tolerable loss on any trade is, say, for example, $1,000. And the price of a security, say, for example, $100. And its expected volatility for the day is 1%, because its annual volatility is, say, 16%, and you have 256 trading days in a year. So annualized volatility as published in the implied vol data of securities with options, you can divide the number of trading days, you can take a square root of the number of trading days in a year and divide the annual vol by the square root of number of trading days in a year. Approximately, most markets have a number close to about 250 to 260. So an approximation of 256 will only create a difference or error on the third decimal place in the divisor. So an easy example I picked up, an annual volatility of 16%. So daily volatility is 1%. If you think your trade has been chosen very carefully by using some technical analysis, some model or whatever, So it must survive over 95% of other trades, which may just get knocked out of mere volatility. So two standard deviations apart in normal standard, normal distribution would be two volatility points. So 16% annualized vol is 1% daily volatility. So 2% fluctuation would happen 95% of the time. So if you will say for example that you've not used any other timing tools, no intraday charts, no divergences in momentum, no trend line breakouts, no algorithms to read the news on social media, you're just a random trader flipping the coin, then you should keep, say for example, for a security with 16% annual vol, 2% as your tolerable non-reactive range, that if the security price fluctuates by 2% in a year, in a day, whose annual vol is 16%, your trade will be undisturbed. So you'll have to divide your $1,000 by 2%. So you can take a $50,000 position if your max tolerable loss is $1,000 in a single day. So this is where you create your position sizing. You first calculate what is your entitlement to lose from this business of trading, say, over a year, by calculating your expenses budget, your compulsive savings budget, your tax budget, and you calculate all of those out from your secure income from dividends, income from bond interest, income from somebody in a partnership, you've put in money and he's going to give you a royalty. You invested with 5 friends in taking up a franchise of, say, 10 7-Eleven stores or 10 Reliance retail stores or whatever. So from whatever is expected income, non-trading income, non-investing income, non-market income, payouts, cash flows, from your expected cash flows, once you've calculated back your expected costs of living, sustaining your responsibilities, sustaining your future build out, that you have to save for a house, you have to pay for your EMIs, you have to save for your son's college, or blah, blah. And whatever then is left is your risk capital. Your risk capital is not your entire capital. And most people actually end up leveraging far more than what their total capital is. Somebody has, a house, he has got some jewelry of his wife, he's got some other landed property. Whatever is their net worth, people will go 3x or 4x or even 5x of that in leverage trading. So all of these, CDS websites, not CDSs, cash for differences, CFD sites, cash for differences, OTC derivatives, and 100 times leverage on forex trading, and $100 will put in your wallet for just opening the account. They're all like casinos. So the whole game is your ego or your own identity, that you have been such a responsible father, you've been such a nice husband, you've always paid your taxes, you hold 3 majors in post-graduation qualifications, or 3 majors in finance, or that, you've been such a handsome guy, whatever is your identity, that gets dented when you are seen as having lost a lot of money. So first, overcome your identity by trading only for fulfilling your duties. So the fixed duties, all the expenses, savings that I explained, those taken out, the remaining portion of your risk capital, you can become very duty bound to it. That this risk capital is there with you to make a larger wad of risk capital and improve the lot of all your duties towards your family, towards your society, towards your government, towards your church, towards your temple, that you can become a more responsible man having more resources by having deep respect for capital. That everybody is not having this luxury called having larger and larger pools of capital to trade with. If you've either been lucky or you've been smart, you've been given something that you must uphold with duty and responsibility. So if you have to protect your capital, and how much of a capital loss is allowed to you, you must think about it. And then if all of that is broken down into your micro decision making, how much position size based on volatility is allowed, then the only thing left is to reconnect back to what I started speaking with. And I'll go back to that point, and I'll take a pause now and invite other people who are here with me on the panel to speak, share their thoughts, rebut me, correct me where I'm wrong. Let's discuss it. Let's hear more. I would request Jim Osman after me, but let me reconnect back to that original point. Any decision you should take only when the following things are possible for you: that you are able to estimate the cost of that decision, you are also able to estimate the cost of indecision, and if you are able to do both of these, which may require you to have certain financial skills and availability of certain financial data, only then, if the comparison creates a moment of time when your expected cost of the decision will be less than the expected cost of indecision, then you should automatedly, from your subconscious mind, where your ego cannot percolate, in your subconscious mind, it's 10,000 hours of training to become a karateka, or to become a good trader, or to become a good housewife. The subconscious mind is where pure intellect resides. So if you create rules and they get embedded in your subconscious mind, you can continue to be a discretionary investor or a trader. And only when cost of indecision is likely to become bigger than the cost of decision, you take a decision. And how do you estimate the cost of indecision? If a chart breaks out above this point, the stock can become a doubler. The breakout has already happened. If I don't take the decision to now buy this stock, I may lose an opportunity of making 100%. But if I buy it here, I'm placing a stop loss, say 10% below, for example. So I've got is a 10:1 reward to risk rate. So theoretically, it's all great. But the challenge comes, this is the approach to take a decision. And if you've done too large a trade, then that goddamn 10%, this bloody 10% idea. I'm not going to go back home with this car. I may face blah blah blah. So the catch is, you must do your position sizing based on your long-term entitlement to lose. Break it down over 20, 30, 40, 50 trades. Depend on how frequent a trader you can be. That is on one side. The remaining rule is, if the cost of indecision is becoming bigger than the cost of decision, quickly take that decision. And once you have taken that decision, then the stop loss is also a decision. So if you don't take a stop loss decision, then this indecision can keep dragging you further lower. That mindset, and if you have stuck to your position sizing rule, see, everybody's self-worth is different. Somebody's net worth may be small, but his self-worth is too big. And somebody's net worth may be too big, and he may be a really stingy bastard with a very small self-worth who can do cheap things to anyone despite being a billionaire. So guy with a lower self-worth will be able to take stop losses very fast. So it is the middle class, the class that upholds values, the class that is talking about family values, the class that is talking about personal integrity, the class that wants to face the mirror while shaving every morning. Most of us come from there. And most of us, therefore, are becoming our worst enemies. Our ego is our enemy, but we don't identify our ego as separate from us. So two things: realize this cost cost of decision and indecision, and you must calculate your entitlement to lose, and don't lose it in a go. Lose it in pieces. Then stop losses will automatically happen. I think I've continued to speak, hoping that a large group will develop. I think we have more than a large group now. May I request Jim Osman to unmute himself and share his thoughts? And it would be nice, Jim, we are perhaps speaking to you for the first time. If you would care to please tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Thank you for that, and thank you for your kind words there, and your informative words. I don't join many spaces, but anyone who follows me realizes that my my thrust on all my tweets, or a lot of my tweets, apart from the silly ones, are about risk. And it's very, very important that you quantify risk before anything else. We'll come to that in a second. So just a quick 2 seconds on me. I've been around for 30 years plus in the markets. I run some of the biggest books probably in the world. I started a research firm back in 2007 looking at special situations and catalyst-driven events. We get heavily involved in activism, in moving stocks and breaking up stocks and things like that, and just providing shareholder value, really. And so, I'm looking not really at desperately mainstream stocks, although, one of my biggest calls at the moment is on Uber. But we're looking at hidden places where people, you won't normally look. And I'm a big contrarian, right? If everyone's buying, I'm probably selling. So that's really the skinny on me. But enough about me. But I think that you said some great stuff this morning, and just really, you could probably write a book with the amount of topics you touched on there. The 10,000 hour rule, absolutely. Emotion, absolutely. Risk management, being humble, all that stuff is so important to the investor. And another one which I really drive on my Twitter thread is about emotion, because people, are attracted by making lots of money, right? We're humans, right? We want wealth, we want stuff, we want things, and moreover, a quick way to that stuff is through the stock market, and stories about how you can make the money. Well, I don't view the world too much, and like I say, I've been around time and more than most, and I talk to some of the biggest investors in the world now. Well, so I know what they're thinking. I know, what goes on, and if you ever approach any sort of stock, then you shouldn't approach it in respect of what is the upside, right? Assuming you're going to go long, you should approach it first on risk. How much am I prepared to lose, or how much can I lose against how much am I going to gain? It's very simple. That's dumbed down risk management in a nutshell. And if you don't do that, you're at danger of losing longer term. There's going to be very short-term trades you're going to win on. You can congratulate yourself. You're going to pat yourself on the back. And there's other stuff you're just going to lose big on and give it all back. Like I say, the longevity of staying in the stock market is to start with risk. Okay, I know it sounds really boring, but you'll see a lot of these spaces, a lot of these threads. What's the biggest stocks to buy? And they never, ever start with risk. And that you should be starting with risk, whether you're starting on your investing journey or you're mature or whoever you are. But if you don't quantify the risk, you have a problem, because if things don't go according to plan, and let's face it, if you work on the basis of the majority always wrong, which I do, you're going to lose, and you're going to wonder why you lose. And stop losses are not really going to come into play, because your mindset is, how much I can make. So that could be a problem for you. So I just want to emphasize is start with risk when you're analyzing stocks. Okay, because that's what I do. Okay, how much can I lose on this investment? And the goal is to put all those odds when you've analyzed risk and the volatility analogy of looking at the square root of the stock and the move a day and all that stuff that was explained is fantastic, but ultimately, how many of those pointers can you get on your side? And the idea is to maximize the upside and minimize the downside. I know this is super simple, but very few people actually take this and use it. So that's what I start with. Always start with risk. And you've got to remember that the stock market is not there to make you money. The stock market is there to fool you all of the time. Okay, just take that for a second. It is there to fool you. So whenever I'm looking at a position, whatever it might be, I'm thinking, well, what's the general market view of this? What do they think as well? And if everybody's bullish, and my mindset is always cyclical as well. If everyone's bullish, who's bearish, right? If everyone wants to buy, some of these meme stocks and everyone says it's going up, GME, AMC, whoever you want to say, who's left to buy it? Okay. And there's only one way it can go, and that's probably down. So you got to have that in your mindset as well in terms of risk. But I have maybe 12 to 15 very concentrated positions. In terms of stop losses, not going away too much from the subject. I'm looking at fundamentals first of all. And fundamentals, some may say to me, well, Jim, what, fundamentals don't count anymore. I agree with that. I think they got less and less important, but it's an idea, it's another signpost, and you've got to get as many signposts as you can to point in your direction as possible, assuming you get the right numbers and things like that. But I'm a big fundamental man. So once we start with the fundamentals, we'll start with the insiders, the management, that is. We'll start with the technical movements on the stock and all the rest of it, right? If I can get all those odds in my favor, I know and I'm confident, and which brings back to the point of emotion, that, I'm confident if things move the other way for a few days, I'm not that fussed, right? If you're a smaller guy, I get it, right? If you're taking a 10% profit and you want to stop loss at 5%, let's say, or you want to stop loss as 10%, you're taking a 20% profit. That's up to you, and that depends on your risk management levels and what you can take and all the rest of it, right? But as a fundamental guy, as a longer term investor, and I say longer term nowadays, could be 6 months, could be a year, could be 2 years, right? But you got to look at your fundamental levels and how much margin of safety you've factored in. So when over the last days, if you look at my tweets back in the last days when the market fell over, all I was doing was buying, because I knew that what I had analysed, what my team had analysed for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks on a stock, we would know what we would do in terms of risk. So I never managed P&L. Yeah, of course I'd read over the screen like everybody else, losing hundreds of thousands of bucks. But it didn't faze me because my view is on risk. And you must take that attitude towards the market. It's risk, not P&L you should trade, because your emotion would take over. And as said before, you'd say, well, am I going to have enough money for this? Is it going to lose my latest car payment, mortgage payment? And it's going to sway your decision. You'll sell the position, it will bounce back right up. And that's the problem. And then you'll give up. And so, like I say, risk is the first and foremost thing that I always look at, because everybody here, I'll question everybody here and I'll say, are you good at picking stocks? And they're going to go, yeah. Right? Everybody is pretty much good at picking stocks over time. Okay, everybody's but it's a matter of timing, and some people are better at timing than others. But at the end of the day, everyone is pretty much, can pick a good stock. So it's when the market turns down, and you'll see it on the Twitter threads, you'll see it on the social media, all these people calling up the market and saying what great it is to invest and all the rest of it. When the market goes down, they're nowhere to be seen. They're nowhere to be seen because they don't understand risk. They don't understand that, some of these stocks should be sold, some of these stocks should be bought. And that's what they don't understand. So you got to be super wary of that, of people pushing your emotion into fantastic stories when you haven't done your due diligence. And so that's really what I wanted to say today. And you just work on the basis of, those two principles. The market is there to fool you, and how much can I make and how much can I lose? And if you start with those two very, very simple principles when you look at your stocks, and then throw into what else is the market seeing, what's the current mood of the market on this stock, am I contrarian? My best bets ever have been on market collapses. I make more money on market collapses than upside, because I know what to buy. I'm ready. I understand the risk. I understand the valuation, and you should too. And also on contrarian bets. Some of these contrarian bets have been fantastic for us, when people have said, no, these are the bad news. And, that's a real hunting ground if you ever want to, slightly off the subject, but that's a real hunting ground where, if you want to find positions, just look at some of those stocks on their 52-week lows that are full of bad news, because stocks and everything are cyclical. If on the basis of and speaking along the emotion, along the stuff that I was speaking before, if things can't get any worse, they must get better, right? Unless the stock's going to zero, right? That's another thing. But watch for those cyclical indicators within your positions, because Playboy was a big one. I got into the bottom, right? Playboy reinvented itself as a sexual health, as a brand, along from the days of when it was before exploiting women. So I got into that $11. Now, at the end of the day, that rallied up to 40, 50, whatever. But then people started getting on the back of it. And people were like, yeah, this is great. This is great. And then the stock fell down to 25. So, you've got to recognize those cyclical moves of the market as well. And you can be able to trade those. And again, that's how you manage risk. So if you've got a big position up there, is it going to the moon? It may be. Is it going to the moon now? Maybe not. So you can scale back in those sort of cycles as well. So recognize, they say recognize the room, recognize the cyclicality of your positions as well. And it can be quite difficult. It can come with experience as well. But stop losses are so important as a small guy, if you're nimble, because long term you will be a winner. You will be a winner by, it's the same old. So they say cut your losses and run your longs and run your profits. It's obvious. So just keep to that kind of mantra if you want. And but as a bigger guy, I'm looking more at fundamentals. But hopefully that gives an insight to the way I view the world. And if you've got any questions, please feel free.
Jim, what would you say are the main reasons for which people, despite having decided some stop loss points, fail to execute their stop losses when those situations come?
It's one word: emotion. And I speak a lot about that.
What provokes that emotion?
I think promotion is losses. I mean, you look at the stock. I mean, I don't look at P&L. I do not trade P&L. I trade risk. And, despite what that red loss says, it could be, if I'm a fund trading $1 billion, $5 billion, that absolute number, and I'm taking a loss, is massive. But is the risk? I'm not so. I think you've got to be, like I say, focused on the risk aspect, and it will give you that confidence to say, do I take a stop loss or don't I? Right? But if you're just looking at P&L, absolute numbers, every time, no one likes losing money. Okay, so the bigger that number gets, it's gonna weigh on you the whole time, and we've seen that in the last week, where a lot of small investors got tapped out, and they're thinking that, well, hold on a second, I've sold my position at bottom, this bounce up, I'm no good at this, and the market will find ways, and again, you've got to respect the market. The market will find ways of pushing you out of your positions, of taking the money from you. You've got to remember that. It's very, very important as an investor to, make sure that you're aware that the market is there to lose you money. Okay. And people are not going to like that, but that's the truth.
Thanks, Jim. I'll switch next to the next speaker, who's been waiting with us for a long time.
You.
SX Trading. SX Trading, would you like to introduce yourselves first, and then let's hear your thoughts?
Sir, one request.
Hi.
Sorry to interrupt. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Just one request, Sushil sir. At least one person needs to be on a mute, because there is an echo which is coming in, and we are not being able to hear properly. One request. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so when anybody is speaking, all other people with the speaking privileges will keep their mics muted, so the echo will go away. Please introduce yourselves, SX Trading, and share your thoughts.
So, hi, this is Sandeep here. So, in the past, I work in surveillance department. I got the opportunity in one of the exchange. So, what I observe is that everybody know that the stop loss is good and stop loss is important and must have to keep, especially in this in algo scenario where the price movement is, especially in option, the movement is coming drastically. But it's very difficult to put stop loss, because in algo trading there is an automatically stop loss is there. So machine can put stop loss and reverse the trade automatically. That is I observe in most of the trade in what I observe in trading analysis in surveillance. So it's even I'm now I'm not working in surveillance department, so I'm trading right now. but it's very difficult for me to sometimes to put the stop loss because many time happen that, for example, I sold that position and two, 3 times it reversed from that. So I think let be lightly, and at one day, if we don't put stop loss, then it become blast like. Then it's the drawdown is more than 30 to 40%. Generally, if we especially in option. So that is my view. Hello, Kadia sir.
Yeah, so from working in the surveillance department of the exchange onto the trading desk, coming back onto this side of the world, what do you feel? What are your reactions on this very popular feeling amongst a lot of traders that don't input your stop loss into the trading terminal in advance because the bigger trading algorithms are going to read your stop loss, they are going to clean out your stop loss precisely, and then it will reverse. That's a very, very commonly prevailing feeling amongst a lot of traders. What's your reaction to this popular market feeling, particularly when you come from a surveillance background?
So I observed that there is no such type of uh, existence. So there is no one can have an idea where is the all the order are, except that 20 market depth is everyone. So because the speed at which the trade is executed, like there are most of member XTX member, and that is trading in almost every script in NSE, MCX, BSE, not in BSE. So there was no such thing that someone is dragging our stop loss or no. There is no such thing. It's just a market and a movement. Every algo has a different kind of stop loss strategy and everyone. And sometimes some algo is not working properly, then also your stop loss will uh, lost. So there is no such thing like that.
Okay, we get you that these are wrongly founded feelings. So we had originally agreed about an hour. We are past that limit. Any quick questions or comments anybody else wants to make, they can request for the mic, and then we can have some conclusions. Does anybody else want to speak anything or ask a question or make any comments? Please request to be a speaker, and I'll pass on the mic to you. But if you find none, then maybe in a minute's time, I'll just make a brief conclusion and I'll publish the recording. Okay. Somebody is requested to speak called Bakar Baz. Now, that's a very dangerous handle to have. So, Bharat, your name is Bharat. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you have on mind.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So basically, I'm quite a new to investing. So my question is like, we are do agree like stop loss is must and we must have, but the question is what and what parameter we should decide the stop loss. Like we have a moving average, we have a Fibonacci level, we have a lot many things. So as Shreya rightly pointed in many of the spaces that n moving average can be better or worse than n+1. So moving average should not be the main criteria. So just would like to understand what exactly should be the it is whether a percentage of loss or what exactly should we follow for the stop loss putting that.
Perhaps you missed the early part of this conversation. When the recording gets published, please go through it again. The same, the reason for stop losses to fail and people failing to put their stop losses into activity is not because you are choosing one indicator over another. Some of the indicators can actually make you mentally complicated, and there is too much of if then this then thinking that comes, particularly Elliott wave guys. They will keep seeing newer waves, but even for them to survive in proper trading, it is not about which indicators. The same reasons or the same decision tools with which you opened your risk decision, it is the same tools you will deploy to take any further decision to either add more position or to reduce the position or to close it down. So it is never about the indicators, but the initial part of the conversation I did explain, when the cost of indecision becomes in your mind or in your system the expected cost of indecision becomes bigger than the cost of expected cost of decision, then you should take a decision. So please go through this recording again, and I think hopefully it will be clearer to you. Any more questions or comments, or I'll just simply conclude and say goodbye to everyone. Brief, to the point spaces are actually much more productive. It's even possible to listen to the recording and the parts that we may have missed. But a 3-4 hour of idea slanging match is a lot of entertainment to the mind and seldom productive. So I don't think there are any more comments or questions. Or somebody else has requested. Let me see. Amar Koradia. Amar is an old horse of the markets. Let's hear what he has got to say. I'm sure something interesting. Yes, welcome, Amar. What are your thoughts?
So, sir, thank you so much for very interesting spaces on trading psychology. A very simple question. You mentioned ego being one of the biggest enemies, and rightly so. So, in your experience, and I'm sure you have a very long history in trading. What are a few ways in which someone can tone down the ego, or kind of help themselves in order to improvise in this profession?
Same answer. You missed the early part of the conversation. In the first half an hour, I was non-stop speaking about it. So when the recording gets published, you can go through it. Though I think Jim wants to give you another answer. So Jim, go ahead and unmute your mic and speak what you think is a good answer for Amar Koradia.
Yeah, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and I'm going to end quite quickly. I think what we all suffer from emotion, right? And we all and it drives the markets, and it drives our feelings and everything like that, the way we trade. And I think the ultimate curtail on emotion is being able to understand your position and understand what the risk is and understand what the loss could be and understand what the upside is and understand everything you can about it. Because as soon as you know that, you know why things are moving and you know the function of those movements. And that's what I find, over the years has been my drive for curtailing that emotion. So knowing your position. So if something comes up on the Twitter and let's buy AMC, and everyone dives into it, don't know why you bought it, and it goes down, then you should really know your position inside that. It's always pushing that on the Twitter thread.
Sure, Jim. Thank you so much.
So, Amar, apart from what I would request you to go through the recording in the initial part as to what causes the ego to bloat up, it's not knowing how much you are entitled to lose and ending up creating a position larger than what your self-respect can handle. So I'll illustrate this with another example. Why is it that we read ever in media? It's rarely, very, very rarely, that a bank side trader lost his job because of losing too much money. Very, very few bank side traders lose their job, and most of them are for, breaking the law or doing something very creative. But it is the larger number of traders on the hedge fund side, or what you call as a retail trader, that is a non-institutional trader, who goes belly up. So the hedge fund traders go belly up and the bank traders don't go belly up, is because hedge funds thrive on the mojo of personality-driven dealing rooms. The celebrity statuses that big bonuses or celebrity status hedge fund managers driving their marketing to, a lot of hedge funds drive their marketing and raise capital on the personality of their key traders. So the hedge fund side celebrates the ego often, and that is why they get screwed for that ego when the screwing comes. But the banks are a far more organizational place. One trader inside a bank dealing room is like one amongst 500 people, and very few hedge funds ever employed 500 people together. And forget about having 500 traders inside a hedge fund. Citadel tried to be a bank dealing room kind of a trading room, a football field sized trading room, but most of the so-called extremely well-known hedge funds or personality-driven, individually branded funds seldom have had 1,000 traders or 500 traders. So bank dealing rooms that have a 500 or 1,000 traders, more or less, the risk and the compliance even if it becomes a pain in the ass, it actually helps cut egos, and it is all rule-based trading. More than focusing on this or that, every trader has to focus on the amount of risk capital available to him. It is the bank compliance works very strictly on the VAR principle. The hedge funds are also supposed to work the same way, but the overinflated influence of one or a few individuals that creates a personality cult around them. So those rules gets thrown into the wind sooner than they get thrown into the banking trading rooms. So for individuals who are trading markets, how to replicate that and how to restrain your ego, I've tried, even though it's a chatty thing, in a chatty style, I've said, go through it carefully. The mental steps to, prevent the ego to rouse to a point where it becomes unmanageable are all there. So thanks for this good question again. I think there's nobody else who has a point or question to raise. So I'll make a brief summary that those who came forward to share their thoughts, thank you very much. Next few spaces, if we'll have far many more speakers and a lot of discussion. Nobody has a monopoly on ideas. I host these spaces more for learning. As much as I might be appearing like a guy who's selflessly sharing things, there's hardly anything selfless. I have found those spaces more useful for myself, where there has been strong discussion, many varieties of points. So I do hope those will be there. And hopefully this recording will definitely clearly get published. Please go through it, all of it again. So thank you very much for coming in. And I'll conclude this space now and see you soon.